talk to your kid. Don't sit down at the dining room table and say, now we're going to have a talk.
Youth that do gamble are 6 times more likely to develop an addiction as an adult.
You have this certain mentality, never my kid.
They shouldn't feel isolated for making a healthy choice.
For a safe, healthy, and drug-free community.
Watch Step Up to Save Our Children today.
Hello, and welcome to this episode of Step Up to Save Our Children. If you are new to these podcasts, my name is Denise Mayer. I am the founder and the director of Step Up Anderson Township. We are a coalition promoting a safe, healthy, and drug-free community. We are attempting to educate parents and caregivers where you are. So if that's picking up your child from ballet, if that's trying to finish your laundry, whatever it is that you're doing, you can stop and start these and pick the podcast that particularly you're interested in. So without further ado, I am going to introduce my guest that I'm very excited to have on here. Mary goes way back with me from the time that I first decided I wanted to do coalition work. And I met with her probably about 7.5 years ago. So Mary is amazing, and I'm going to read her resume just a little bit here. So Mary Makley-Wolff has her master's degree in gerontology and counseling. She's an Ohio certified prevention consultant for the last 30 years. And for the last 15 years, she has been working in substance abuse prevention coalition and suicide now prevention director with Hamilton County, and the fiscal agent is Talbert House. So many of you know about Talbert House and the wonderful work that they do. So now Mary is handling that through them and doing this suicide prevention. So Mary, welcome to this podcast. Thank you so much for being on here.
Denise, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure. You're a wonderful person, and you are doing amazing work in your community. Kudos to you.
Thank you, Mary. Thank you. Well, there's so many things that go along with where our lane mostly is substance abuse, my coalition. But as we well know, there's an 83% crossover between that and the mental health. And I think if nothing else, the COVID epidemic brought that full center that we need to be addressing the teens' mental health. So I'm going to kind of turn that over to you because I want to know everything that you can tell the parents about the children and what is affecting their mental health, and of course, preventing anything catastrophic from happening.
Sure. Well, it's, we blame a lot of things on COVID for sure. It was a very stressful, very traumatic event that we had never seen in our country, a life-changing, very impactful to a lot of people in very negative ways. But I will tell you that the issue of teen mental health and suicide has been going on for quite some time. Mm-hmm. And I will also say that as we start our journey talking a lot about teen mental health and then suicide prevention, I do want to recommend a really good book. This book is The Anxiety Generation by Jonathan Haidt. I think this should be mandatory reading for all parents. It really goes into what some of those root causes are for what we now call an epidemic of youth mental health issues. And I think it gives some really good advice for parents about some strategies that you can use to deal with the situations. So let's think about children, and imagine for a moment, think about you as a parent. What were you doing when you were between the ages of 12 and 24? Do you remember what a childhood felt like? I can tell you, I am a tail end baby boomer, so I was a product of playing outside a lot. I was a product of, you learned how to get along with people by playing spud and kickball and ghost in the graveyard and hide and seek. And You came home when the street lights came on, and you were given a certain amount of freedom and trusted that you knew how to be okay and that the world was a safe place to be in.
Right. Absolutely.
So what I can tell you that what we have seen and what the research will touch on is, let's fast forward to what happens with kids today. How many times do you actually see young people outside playing in your neighborhood?
Well, I do in mine, but that's unusual. Hardly
Mhm.
ever.
Mm-hmm. It's not as common as it used to be. We are not seeing kids playing. And a lot of kids are playing, but they're playing on sports teams that have, prescriptive ways of interacting with lots of adults, overseeing things. And if you're not playing sports, maybe you're in the band, or you're doing theater work. So there's possibilities there. But outside of that, most of the time with our young people is being spent on this lovely device,
I know.
our dreaded cell phones. And
Absolutely.
we have a huge barrier in raising children these days because of this device.
Mm-hmm.
And I can tell you that childhood looks a lot different than it used to be. I mean, the amount of information that any one young kid, a 12-year-old, nowadays, when you try to discipline a 12-year-old, I had the experience where we were talking about some facts around drug use, and I had said a fact, and this 12-year-old, oh, I guess that's right. So he was fact checking me on on my information via his own cell phone, and Googled it to make sure that I was telling him correct information. So our kids are challenged with a lot of things. They're getting information coming at them 24/7, 365 from all kinds of sources that we never had. When I was a kid, you had adults. When I was a kid, you had the idea of, there were a lot of people that were home. So even if your mom wasn't watching you, you knew the neighbors were watching you.
Right.
So there was a village, so to speak, that we had more connection that way. Definitely when we got into the COVID pandemic, what really became aware of how disconnected we all are. We think we're connected through this device, but we are not experiencing real-time, face-to-face talking. I think our young people today are struggling with social emotional regulation. They're struggling with being able to look somebody in the eye and talk. Our young people they're in a world that is very technologically heavy. They're literally walking between the real world and the digital world.
That's the truth. I really like that. You're exactly right.
So when we begin to try to unpack what is happening with children's mental health, we have to understand that we're losing connection and that ability to communicate in the real world because we're deferring to this digital world where we
I
think,
like that. That's exactly right.
it's why, can you often get a child may not pick up the phone to talk to you, but you text them and they'll text you right back.
Right.
So
exactly.
even the way we communicate is stilted. So we have to create emojis to show emotion and things like that.
And yet those really don't, those really don't give the whole picture.
No.
More things have happened by people conversing on text or on email, and it's interpreted totally wrong.
Correct.
And, the outcome is terrible.
It absolutely is. It absolutely is. I'll tell you the other thing that has happened since, childhood of my days is that we are now in a time and a place where we know so much more about brain development than we ever did before. We studied the brain. We have looked at long-term studies on what's happening with the brain. And for our young people, they are learning how to navigate the world as they are going through brain development, which we now understand doesn't end until around the age of 25 to 27, depending on a whole host of factors. I think the old way of thinking was, well, by the time you're 5, the kids should know everything and they have all, there was this push on the age of 5. There's a lot of things that happen from 0 to 5, but that really crucial piece of where kids are not experimenting as much with their primitive brains, which is the amygdala, that middle brain, what we call our survival dinosaur brain. And they're able then to use the prefrontal cortex, which is where you can evaluate and measure and use reason and logic. All of that's in the front part of the brain. But for teenagers, they're still having processes that are pruning all of those neurons and dendrites, getting them to be able to access that part of their brain a lot easier. But that doesn't finish until, so many times we say, well, can't they just think right? No, actually they can't. They really can't.
I know.
And
yeah.
They're not lying to you, or they're not trying to be, disruptive on purpose. The teenager's brain is set to have them be exploratory, to learn, to make mistakes, to be adventurous, to try and test things. That is simply how we are hardwired. So sometimes what's helpful for parents is to do some digging into adolescent brain development. It can be hugely helpful when you realize, much as we understand now about trauma, which is a whole nother area of, development with young people that we understand, there is so much trauma going on in families, in communities, in the world, that it does impact brain development. It can cause the brain to be overdeveloped in some areas and underdeveloped in others. So stress, living in an environment that's not predictable, living where you don't have food sufficiency, you have homelessness is a problem. Your parents are not getting along, or there's substance use with the parent, or you're living in a foster care system. So many of these things have an impact on the brains and then the mental health of young people.
Well, and I think, all of those things that you just mentioned, the common denominator is they don't feel safe. And I think a child that doesn't feel safe is going to struggle mentally. I mean, there's just no way that they're not going to do that.
Correct. And I think that continuous stress, those stress hormones, cortisol pouring into the body, it has such a harsh effect on so many things, including brain development. What we also know that we didn't know 30, 40 years ago is that we can intervene and change the course of mental health processes a lot earlier than we ever thought we could. What we do know that the research tells us is that anxiety disorders, in particular in young people, usually show up around the age of 10. That's pretty early. What we also know is that the sooner we recognize that there may be a problem that we can do something about, getting somebody hooked up to have an evaluation, or maybe to try some strategies that are about creating protective factors, the sooner we do and act and do things, the better off we are. There was, particularly in substance use work, you would always hear people say, well, we have to wait till somebody hits rock bottom before we can do anything. Absolutely not, especially not with young people. We do not have time to wait. We actually need to think about what could be going on and then do our best to get that person some kind of screening tools, working with a doctor, things that matter. I do understand that there will be families that don't have access to things. And I do understand we are woefully inadequately staffed with psychologists, psychiatrists, social workers, counselors. It's a field that's struggling like anything else. People have compassion fatigue. There's a lot going on.
Absolutely. I think, though, that with the young people, the parents have a tendency sometimes to think, well, he's just being a kid, like he's acting out or he's bedwetting or whatever the case may be, instead of actually recognizing that some of these are,
Right.
red alerts that they need to, and if they can't reach out and get somebody, like you said, we're woefully inadequate in that area, even talking to the teacher, the parent can talk to the teacher and say, hey, this is what we're seeing at home. I'm worried because what do you think? I mean,
Right.
sometimes that's helpful, sometimes not, but.
And it can even be helpful when, what used to happen was you had neighborhood groups where you had people talking to each other. Hey, I'm noticing this. Is anyone else? You kind of had a tribe as a mom. You had a mom tribe or a dad tribe, or you had connection with family. And while I will say people, again, feel more connected in terms of digital, oh, well, I have, everybody, we can do a Zoom meeting or we can do this. We have never been more
Disconnected.
apart. We're just disconnected. It's not a true, real relationship. And I think that is what a lot of our young people are struggling with. But starting at the advent, and Jonathan Haidt in his book talks about the advent of the smartphone in 2010, worldwide, girls first, because girls tended to be more visual and were using platforms that were more visual. So Instagram, they started those comparisons. You started to see people going down and really going down in a bad way. We started to see mental health struggling. But bear in mind that we know in Ohio that the second leading cause of death for certain populations that were in that 12 to 24 group, they were showing it was the second leading cause of death was suicide, because most young people die either accidentally or, in the case of suicide, on purpose. And when you are seeing there's a lot of desperation and hopelessness going on with our young people, we need to do something. We need to start getting better at it. So I hear a lot of talk and chatter from different generations about, kids are just being dramatic, and they all think they have things they don't have. What I will tell you is we are better at communicating our feelings than previous generations. We have normalized talking about mental health as an important thing to do. And therefore, if we are seeing more people showing up to get support, it's hard to say, is that because that didn't exist before? Or were we just not looking at it as a problem to fix before? That is where it's hard to really know. I will tell you, these days, a grandparent may not be comfortable with their grandchild talking about their feelings, but that grandchild is doing themselves great service by being able to communicate how they feel, talking about when they're struggling, and bringing up what the challenges are and how that's making them feel physically and emotionally. I think the one thing that I always caution parents when I hear the term, well, they're just doing that for attention. Well, they need attention. Parents have become just as addicted to their phones and social media
100%.
as the young people. You can go to a restaurant any day of the week and see an entire family sitting there all on their phones, nobody talking, nobody interacting. And honestly, we're going to pay a price for that. We're seeing that becomes a very toxic thing, and it drives dopamine levels in our brains, and it does all kinds of things. So I'm here to semi-vilify phones, because I think that is a strategy that parents can use when we talk about some strategies. But overall, I would say most of our young people right now are struggling in three areas, either in an anxiety bucket, either in a depression bucket, or in that substance misuse bucket. And many times, the reason why they're using substances is to self-medicate the way they feel.
Right.
So this is why we talk about a crosswalk between mental health, substance use, and suicide. Those things all do crosswalk across together all the time. Not everyone who dies by suicide has a mental illness, but a lot of folks do. Not everyone who has a mental illness uses substances, but a lot of folks who are using substances have a co-occurring disorder, meaning that underlying their use is they're trying to treat anxiety or depression. Those are the things that we do know for sure. What I want parents to know is the biggest thing that we need to do as parents is learn how to use our ears and keep our mouths closed. We need to listen non-judgmentally. And I know that is a very hard thing. I have a son and a daughter, and those teen years can be very challenging. And there's some rebellion going on, which is actually normal. It is normal. We need to, as parents, be aware. What are our kids doing? Who are they hanging out with? Where are they going? What are they looking at on their phones? How much time are they spending on their phones? What are they doing in their rooms? We've somehow abdicated our authority as parents, saying that, yeah, I don't need to, or, well, they're fine. They have their phone. Okay. There is an incredible amount of bad things on the phone.
Well, and they start out sometimes very young and use it as a babysitter, the phone or the screen, whatever that, and then they're comfortable with that. Oh, they're being taken care of. Well, when they're a little one and they're watching, some of these little cutesy whatever, I'm not advocating it, but they do it.
Sure.
It's probably not as harmful, but when they get into the teen years and you have the bulimia issues and all the eating disorders and all of that stuff, that's just, of course it's going to lead to, these mental health issues.
Right. What we do know too is that peers will talk to other peers. And so we've seen a lot of initiatives with mental health in what we would call empowering and engaging peers to help be the eyes and ears for adults of somebody who's struggling, and to be that kind of person that can step in when somebody is feeling down and then maybe help get them to that next level of care. It's a heavy responsibility, especially for kids who are using substances or who are feeling suicidal. Those are big, heavy issues that your peer may not be. And as they're developing their own brains, it's not easy to navigate. So we do know that there's some good programming that is happening in schools, and it starts first with the littles, and it's about that social, emotional self-regulation. I understand there's been people who they don't understand what that social emotional learning is. It's about learning how to regulate that you don't have a tantrum every time you don't get what you want.
Right.
And we're having to do more to teach that, because kids are coming to school without having any social emotional self-regulation because they're not getting it from home, which tells me one of two things. They're living in a very chaotic environment, or their parents are completely checked out, and there's nobody there that's helping shape and guide children. And that either way is problematic.
It is. And there's such a huge number. I mean, we're out in Forest Hills, and it seems like, because my daughter is a special ed teacher at one point now, she's in the classroom, but they have so many children that are in that behavioral module or whatever, that they're all at the one school now because they just can't self-regulate,
Right.
I mean, there's other issues, but yeah.
Right. Well, and the thing is, we can really do something about that. There's a wonderful program called PACS Good Behavior Games, and it's a fascinating, it's an evidence-based practice where it really helps kids who are struggling to self-regulate learn how to manage self-regulation. And they learn it by watching their peers. Okay, everybody's doing an activity as a group, and then, and if you do this, you get this. And so it's almost skills can be taught. The sooner we recognize that there's problems for young people, particularly with their ability to manage their emotions, we can do things about it. And it's not always, oh, they have ADHD or whatever. What it could be is they are living in a very chaotic environment. And so what we actually need to do is help support the parents and get resources to the family, and then help build that structure that helps then raise everybody up. So it's very hard. And I mean, it's easy to parent blame. It's easy to blame everything. It is always more complex than we realize. We also know that there are just some people that have a genetic predisposition to anxiety or depression or bipolar disorder or schizophrenia. There are some major mental health disorders that are genetic, and that's nobody's fault. That is just simple genetics. But more than anything, it's the environment in which somebody is living and whether they have protection, protective factors, which I would call things like one huge protective factor. And we get this information from the Search Institute and the 40 developmental assets. One caring adult in your life can wipe out a lot of ACEs, which are those adverse childhood experiences, which we know are trauma-inducing things. So abuse, neglect, divorce, food insufficiency, just not feeling secure, not having a security. Can you imagine a child where every day you wake up, you don't know if you're going to be able to eat or not, or every day you wake up and you're not sure where you are or who's taking care of you? Can you imagine why that child then comes to school and falls apart and has a bad day, and then say, wow, what's wrong with you, kid? What we now know is what's happened to you is the more appropriate answer that we ask young people and we ask children. What is happening in your environment? They may not even have the language skills to be able to tell us that. So we kind of package all of these things together and we think about what are some things that we can do. Being connected to a school community is a huge protective factor. Another protective factor, having a library card, going to the library, having being somebody that likes to learn is a protective factor. Having a meal as a family at night is a protective factor. Having just connections with others where you feel loved and supported is a protective factor. The 40 developmental assets is a wonderful tool. I tell parents to look at that because you could pull out an asset and kind of focus on that. I know there are schools that will do asset builders and how do you develop relationships and how do you reach out and create connection. So the other document that I think is really important for parents, besides understanding about protective factors, is really understanding what are risk factors. And I think we talked a lot about it. One particular risk factor that is probably the biggest one when we're talking about suicide, in particular with young people. If they are talking about it, that does not mean they won't do it. So there was a lot of mythology that, well, if people are talking about it, they won't do it. That's not true. It's also not true that talking about it puts it in someone's head. That is simply not true. Ideation and thoughts are always going on in people's heads. It's whether they're verbalizing it or not. So we know that a real red flag is when somebody is saying to you, I don't want to be here anymore. I don't feel like I matter. It doesn't matter if I'm here. But if they're doing things like talking about suicide, have been exposed to a peer who has died by suicide, or anyone in their family that has died by suicide, those kids are far more at risk. We are more concerned about keeping better eyes and ears on how they're behaving. Things like expressing hopelessness about the future. The current political environment that we're living in is very scary to a lot of people. And imagine you're a kid and you really don't quite understand everything, but you're noticing the adults are worried, or people are losing jobs, or things are costing more, and you see the distress. That can be distressing. So a child who's displaying severe or overwhelming emotional pain and distress. I think a perfect example of this sometimes is we tend to think about when boys and girls break up in high school as oh, that's a nothing burger, that, they'll get over it and everything will be okay. Honestly, a bad breakup can be devastating and can be a trigger for a suicide to a young person who thinks with their brain development that this is the only thing that I'm ever going to have in my life. And they're not able to forecast into the future yet. They're just not. So there is never, the one thing you should never say as a parent is that somebody is doing this only for attention. No, people need attention, and then we need to be giving them our attention.
Right.
We need to be focusing our energies there. Another area that when we're talking about suicide risk is some changes in behavior. We all know our kids. We kind of know when things are okay or not. If they are suddenly withdrawing, or they're changing social connections or situations, that's something that's a little bit of like, I better start paying a little attention here. How come they used to be best friends with this person and now they're not speaking to that person, or they've got this whole new group? Changes in sleep. Either they're increasing their sleep or they're decreasing their sleep. Same with appetite, either eating too much or too little. But these very simple things, these daily activities of living, they're not showering anymore. Their hygiene is getting bad. Now, I will say that can be teenagers too, but it's where you're mixing it with some other things. Oftentimes it's increased agitation and irritability can be another, because this person, it is not a normal function of humans to want to die by suicide or to die at all. We are hardwired to survive, which is why we have such an active amygdala in the middle of our brain trying to save us all the time. So there's oftentimes in people who are feeling suicidal, and this includes young people, a lot of ambivalence. I don't really want to, but I'm in so much pain, I can't think of another way to get out of it. Nothing is working, and I don't know how to help. Any increase or use of substances, very, very important to be aware of substance use. And it is very easy to hide. Denise, you talk a lot about the vaping. You have a couple, can you give me an example of how easy it is to hide vaping?
Oh my goodness, for sure. First of all, it's so small, it looks like a USB thing at least that's one of the things.
Sure.
And, they put it in, we do that right under your nose. They put it in the little well next to the bed where you would never see it. They put it in, different cans, all kinds of stuff. Kids are very smart and smarter mostly than the adults who didn't grow up with this. So they don't know where to look, but it is there, and parents can find it if they want to look and be on top of it. And I always say, oh, will you respect the child's privacy? To a degree, when you suspect something is going on, it is your duty and your responsibility as a parent to look through their things and find out what is going on so you can help them, because otherwise it just goes on. But the thing I'd like to say about the vaping, it is now gone to the next level, and this gets back to the mental health, is that the vapes now, have the THC oil and different things in those cartridges. And then of course, on top of that, fentanyl and some of that as well, which is, a death sentence basically. But with the THC, they get, if they're doing a lot of it, they become paranoid. And then sometimes if they're tending genetically to go to schizophrenia, bam, they're there. And so, these are serious mental health issues that they're seeing, like at the emergency room at Anderson's hospital. I talk to them all the time. And, so these are all things that could be easily hidden. and B, end up with what they call greening out or hyperemesis syndrome. They're vomiting and vomiting. And, they tell me the parents bring them in and say, well, they have the flu. Well, you know what? You only have the flu usually for a short, maybe a 24-hour period, not days, and you don't have it repeatedly. So, yeah, it's easy to hide. And apparently parents overlook a lot of this stuff.
Absolutely. And I think that many times, there are lots of nefarious actors out there helping to facilitate getting substances in the hands of kids that shouldn't have them. And we know that having a good coalition that is working on, like you have with Step Up, on compliance checks and working with your police, doing that hidden in plain sight. Here's parent education, caregiver education. It doesn't always have to be parents. It could be, what's going on. So kind of layered on that with the substance stuff is thinking about, if you have a child who is struggling with depression or anxiety, some of the things we need to think about is what is in that person's environment. So we talk a lot about when we were dealing with opiates that was so rampant. We talked a lot about locking up medications and things like that. But what we need to talk about when we're talking about suicide is we need to be locking up guns, lethal means, knives, things like that, anything that somebody could use to hurt themselves.
Right.
What we know are girls will attempt more frequently, but boys will die more frequently. And the reason is very simple. Girls use less lethal means than boys. However, as we've seen more women go into the military and more access to, weapons. And I'm not here to take people's guns away. What I'm here to do is educate parents on how do you keep your child who's struggling with mental illness and potentially has suicidal ideation. You have a responsibility to make that environment safe for that young person. And
absolutely.
You really, you can't just say, well, I need to have my gun. Okay. But you need to also have a lock. You need to have a plan. You need to make sure that your children don't know where those guns are. They do a really good training called CALM, which is counseling about lethal means, that oftentimes Children's Hospital will talk about it. We talk about both. We talk about locking up your guns and locking up your medications. Let's keep these supplies away from people that could have either addiction or suicidal ideation.
And so the other thing about the guns, Mary, is that you don't have to have the ammunition with the gun. You can have different hiding places, and not have any. I think people seem, they think, oh, well, I want to be able to get to my gun if I need to, or whatever. Okay, that's fine. But you don't have to have the clip in. You don't have to, there's things you can do to make sure that those kids can't get a hold of that and do something with it.
Correct. Because I can't imagine as a parent the amount of guilt you would feel if the child dies within your house with the things that are in your house. We know a lot of substance use stuff happens. Where are kids getting alcohol? It's that beer fridge in the garage that we don't have locked up.
Right.
There is a lot of responsibility for parents. You're over the age of 21. There are things you can do. When you're under the age of 21, there are things you shouldn't be doing. And you need to put barriers to the access for the young people and not assume that they won't come and rage or we've had situations where neighborhood kids will come in trying to get things out of garage, because they know that's a beer fridge.
Right.
So some of these things are common sense.
Exactly. But they say, and I like this phrase, what you permit, you promote. And I think that's really, I like that phrase because it covers a lot, and when you really think about that, all the young kids that the parents think it's a rite of passage now, they're graduating high school and they're 18. And, and we're going to just let them have some drinks and, at the house, and they'll learn how to, all those myths that we know are absolutely ridiculous. And you once said to me, I think in the very beginning, we talked delay, delay, delay. And that is
Correct.
absolutely the right phrase for any underage drinking. And most of these other things, there's really no set thing. You say, well, you can buy cannabis when you're 21, but should you? I mean,
Right.
there's so many things that, you can, but should you? And I see people and I smell it everywhere I go, the cannabis. And I think, where are we going with this?
Yeah. We are living in a very difficult time when the de facto economic development is addiction, whether it's alcohol, marijuana now, and then let's throw in gambling,
I
because
just was
that
going to
is
say
a
the
whole
gambling.
other area that we really are starting to see very serious concerns with young people. And believe it or not, it starts with those gaming. You think you're doing your kid a favor by having them play Fortnite,
Yeah,
but
not so
then
much.
there's things built in there, loot boxes, things that,
Right.
and what all that is actually doing is priming them for when they get old enough to do sports betting on this little device. They don't
Yeah.
even have to go to a casino. They don't have to go anywhere.
And
We
it's
have made,
winning
Yeah.
something without having to pay to do it. You know what I mean? Like
exactly.
it's just that whole concept starts to rewire the brain,
It does. And what it really affects is the dopamine. And dopamine is our phones. The reason why we say you and I are talking about something, and then we'll notice later on our phone there are ads for a particular thing that we were talking about.
Whatever yes.
Wow.
Scary. It's
There's
scary.
There's a whole bunch we don't know about what is being triggered, but what we do know is our brains are very much hardwired for survival. And dopamine is one of those survival pleasure facilitators. It is trying to help you survive. And if this thing is pleasurable, then you'll keep doing it over and over again. So a good marketer who wants you to buy a product uses those same principles to sell products. Well, that product could be, marijuana, alcohol, whatever. I do think too, and I know this is not going to be popular, but parents in these DORA districts need to wake up.
Oh yeah.
When we set up an idea that you can have to go everywhere you go, you need to carry a glass of alcohol with you. Our children are watching that.
Right.
And we're normalizing binge drinking. We're normalizing having to have alcohol everywhere you go. It's not even that you're having a meal with it anymore. You're walking around and we have set ourselves up for some really painful in environments in which kids are watching, and that's who they emulate. So there's a huge responsibility as parents.
Yeah, and it's so true. Think about this. I thought about this the other day. When I was growing up, we drank water or whatever. I don't know, soda if we wanted it. But now everybody has a Starbucks or a coffee in their hand. You can't watch anything that they're not walking around with that or whatever. And then we make the leap that they're walking around with a drink in their hand. And you're right. That is exactly the modeling that we're giving to our children, that's a normal thing to do. And it's an acceptable thing to do. And A, it's not acceptable. But for sure. And B, it's certainly not acceptable under the age of 21. So
we send this, our kids are walking in a world that sends us a lot of mixed messages.
Oh yeah.
I think it's very hard. This is why we wonder why our teenagers are stressed. The other thing is, if you're not watching how much kids are consuming social media, we hear a lot about bullying as, okay, this kid was bullied and then they die by suicide. It is never that simple. It is never that somebody's suicide death was an A plus B equals C scenario. Most likely there were other things going on. Can bullying exacerbate a situation? Absolutely. But it is never, the research shows that is never the only thing that was going on. There are a lot of things that lead up. And this is why we are really, really spending a lot more time looking at, with our young people, the 8 areas of wellness. We have ways of looking at wellness there are all kinds of things, parts of our life. We have a spiritual life. We have an educational life. We have a social life. We have all these quadrants of our life that if something's going bad in one area, how do we build up protective factors in other areas that kind of help when you're struggling over here? And this is what you can do. So sources of strength, huge, great program. Can't say enough good
I
things.
love it. Yes.
Wonderful. And it's building campaigns. It's building positive social norms. What I would love to see is us take those same campaigns we're using in school and scale them out into the community.
I know.
You could get businesses involved with that. It would be a wonderful. You could, particularly I think about Anderson and the different businesses you have. You could have a way for kids to get like a passport of doing positive things. You have a great park system. You have, assets that kids could be using for, positive things and building on that. I think the other thing that is so important nowadays and is a huge resource available to all of us is the advent of 988. So 988 is it's suicide and crisis hotline. So I want to talk about 988 as a differentiator from 911. In the old days, if somebody was struggling with mental health or anything, your only option was to call 911 and get either police or fire on the scene to deal with it. Not to disparage our first responders, but they are not trained necessarily in how to de-escalate, how to do things. There is they want to be quick and get, move to the next level. They're medically oriented. When we created 988 in this country, the idea was to take those calls that were more mental health related and potentially suicide related or crisis related, give them to people who are trained on how to listen, how to be supportive, how to provide that channel for people to, I didn't study for my test today, or I had a fight with my best friend and I can't talk to them, or my girlfriend and I broke up, or my ex-husband is driving me crazy. Those are all very appropriate things. Or I'm worried about my friend who is using drugs and I don't know what to do. So the whole concept is to build a portal or a resource where people can not only just call, they can text and they can do things like that. We have hotlines that are specific for veterans. We have hotlines that are specific for children with LGBTQ plus folks who feel very alienated. We have special adaptations for people that need to use sign language. 988, it's still new. It was only launched 2 years ago. We're trying to get people to use them. Many communities also have in Hamilton County, we have the 988, but we always have the 281 CARE, which is another hotline. The whole idea is when you're struggling, no one should ever feel alone. We can get you support. We can bring somebody to you.
Yeah. And I think we've really tried to they're continuing to push out the 988 number, that sometimes they just need to talk to somebody.
Right.
Can't talk to mom, can't talk to dad, whatever the situation is. And, but they can reach out there. And I am a big advocate of 988. And I talked to Rick Martin, is our fire chief out here, and he's kind of a consulting coalition member. And I was talking to him the other day and he said, we still continue to get so many of our calls are for mental health issues, not necessarily a medical issue. And you're right. I mean, they try so hard, but they're not trained for that.
No.
So this is what is so important, the 988. It really is.
And the good news is, I think there was a piece of legislation passed that 988 now has to be on all of the young people, on all of their IDs. Their school IDs has to have the 988 number. So really trying to make use of that. Because here's what we know. When we look at the data coming from 988, 85% of the people who are struggling if they're able to talk to somebody, if they're able to work on, maybe they need a safety plan, maybe they need to have some resources suggested to them. Here's a couple of resources. Or they just need somebody that doesn't judge them or jump to the conclusion, that will go at a slower pace and allow them to get back to that center point where they feel secure.
And they feel heard.
Exactly.
And where they feel heard. Yeah.
Exactly. And I think what we do know is that when it's a 911 call for suicide, that is when a person has lethal means access and a definitive plan. Well, if you have plan and access, and the third thing is you've had a prior attempt, those folks we have to keep special eyes on. And sometimes that's a 911 call, not a 988 call.
Right.
Mainly because we have to get, lights and sirens on the scene to save that person, to make sure that they don't hurt themselves.
Right.
The good news is 988 and 911 in Hamilton County talk to each other. They transfer calls. I think we're getting better and better as communities and understanding that we need to have compassion. I know that right now it feels like there's not a lot of compassion in the world, but you know what? Communities and parents and schools can create compassionate communities. There's not hard to do. No. It is about listening and caring.
Absolutely. Well, Mary, we are coming up on a hard stop. I can't believe it. I thought, oh my gosh, what are we going to fill this with? What are we going to talk about? We could go for a couple more hours, I'm sure. We really could. Well, I mean, I just can't thank you enough for being on, and I'll probably have you again because there's still so much more to talk about. But, having been involved a little bit on the edges of a teen suicide, died by suicide, of my granddaughter's best friend. And he was like a freshman in high school. And, just like you said, used a very, a weapon that, is you're not coming back from. Our whole family was affected by that, my poor granddaughter, so this is such an important issue on so many levels.
Absolutely.
And as a community, we just all need to be very aware.
Right. And I will tell you that I am always available to talk to people. We can share my email contact information. I want to help. I'm always looking for people to join our coalition. We meet once a month for an hour, but our whole goal is what can we do in the community to provide prevention and figure out where the gaps are, and how do we need to provide those safe spaces and those key stakeholders that need support, and who are they, and then how can we bring that to the community?
Right. Well, when we launch this, and it'll probably be a week or 10 days, I will have all your information on the bottom, and check with you first to be sure that's what you want. But yes, I think that would be great. I mean, Mary has been such a pillar of strength for me doing this coalition work. And I can remember the first time when we met, and I wasn't sure. I'm not sure now what I'm doing, but I certainly wasn't sure back then. And the direction she gave me was absolutely paramount in establishing Step Up and doing it for seven plus years. So, yeah. But thank you, Mary.
It takes one caring adult. Think about, Denise, you were one caring adult that reached out, and you're building community compassion in a big way. It's not hard to step out. It is hard to keep going. Trust me.
It is.
I get that. And
is hard.
My full support to you, and you are doing amazing things in Anderson Township.
Well, you are so kind, Mary, and thank you so much. I really appreciate you being on. We'll be back in touch. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you all for listening today. You can see these podcasts on YouTube. Our channel is Step Up to Save Our Children, and you can see it also on Facebook, Instagram, X, and LinkedIn. And you can also access all of these podcasts on our website, which is www.stepupanderson.org. They're all listed under the tab under podcast. But please subscribe to our channel on YouTube. That helps us so much. If you can like us and subscribe, then you won't miss any episodes that you might be really, really interested in. So thank you so much, and you have